Good morning, friends. Today is Friday, June 23rd, 2022. And in today's video, I would like to talk about the city of Mariupol because I was kind of browsing Twitter and came across some threads discussing the city, and someone was making a claim that over 22,000 people, civilians, have been killed in Mariupol since the city was under siege. Just to remind you, in case you haven't been following the news, Mariupol came under complete Russian control over a month ago, and famously the remaining defenders of the city have surrendered, or as the Zelensky government said, they were evacuated into prisoners of war camps. And that happened a little bit more recently, because for a long time the so-called defenders of Mariupol were holed up at Azovstal plant, where they used civilians as basically life insurance. I don't want to use the word human shield, but I think we'll call it a human life insurance. As long as the civilians were present on the territory of this gigantic steel mill with an elaborate network of underground tunnels and shelters. There were over 2,000 of them, of 2,000 militants and hundreds of civilians. And as long as the civilians remained, it was pretty much impossible to attack the steel mill with the kinds of weapons that would force the defenders out of their bunkers. And to sort of and it's interesting to note that as soon as the civilians were finally evacuated from the steel mill, which, if I remember correctly, required the intervention of international organizations such as Red Cross, whom the Russians have allowed to intervene on the behalf of civilians in order to get them out of this trap where they were living for weeks. As soon as the civilians were evacuated and the militants holding up in the steel mill had no more insurance, they promptly surrendered en masse, all of them, over a course of 2 days. They just all surrendered. So that's something for you to consider, as I'm going to dive into an article from the New York Times, which was published a few days ago, and I will mention the name of the person who wrote the article down below. I will provide a link for it in the description. And before I go on with the video, I want to remind you to hit the thumbs up button on my videos and subscribe to my channel. On with the article. And just wait, one more thing. Before I read the article, I want you to know that I'm going to read the article, sort of provide a little bit of a reaction to it, and then I'm going to contrast certain points of this article with what I learned from the reporting of of Shraiy, who is a Ukrainian politician. He's a leader of Shraiy party, and he is a blogger and a journalist. And it's kind of on his work that I'm relying to bring you this video. Shraiy did a lot of heavy lifting on this. He's the one who put together a timeline of events for the particular aspect of the story that I'm going to focus on. He's the one who supplied most of the quotes that I'm going to use, and I just want to say a huge fucking thanks to this guy, because the amount of information that he puts out and the quality of it is just fantastic. Anyways, let's go with this article in New York Times. Kiev, Ukraine. To be from Mariupol these days is to be consumed with death. More than a month after Russian forces took full control of the Ukrainian city, the dead are still being buried. In our city, there are a lot of mass graves, a lot of spontaneous graves, and some bodies are still in the streets. The city's mayor, Vadim Boychenko, says this past week at a briefing, guess where he's being briefed? In Kiev. So, right away, you can tell that this isn't an article that's going to inform you about the news, because just the framing of the first paragraph should tell you everything you need to know about the tone this article will have, right? It's not a news article. It's a creative writing article, okay? To be from Mariupol is to be consumed with death. What does that mean? The thing is that the author of the article is either not aware of or is avoiding the videos coming out of Mariupol. Yes, on official Russian, state media channels, but much more so by small bloggers, and which are published on Telegram channels and on YouTube. Unfortunately, all of this material is in Russian and therefore completely inaccessible to the Western audience, but it is there. And basically, the life in Mariupol is returning to normal. Power is being restored. Large projects of cleaning up the debris and rebuilding buildings have begun. This, in fact, according to what I saw on these channels, on these Telegram channels and on YouTube, it looks like the rebuilding of the city began since day one. What's interesting to me is that the person who wrote this article just doesn't even mention this. So there isn't a balance. Instead, she's using the quote of a mayor of the city who is not in the city itself. And he wasn't in the city for 3 months. That's right. This guy, Vadim Boychenko, whom this reporter is quoting in this piece about, how the city of Mariupol is consumed with death. He left. He abandoned the city on the 24th of March. So March to April, April to May, and May to June. 3 months. The guy hasn't been back in a city for 3 months. How does he know what the city is like? But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is that, again, watching these videos of residents of Mariupol who have survived the siege, I get a distinct impression that they hate this mayor. They absolutely hate him. And they hate all his administrators who have left the city on the 24th of March as well. Because they hate him because they feel like they have been abandoned. And they feel like they have been abandoned by the mayor and his team without preparations in place, without shelters, without stocks of water and supplies. But I'm going to go read, and I'm going to continue reading the article here. They are being taken to morgues, landfills, and mass graves. In an endless caravan of death. This is according to Mr. Boychenko's advisor, Petro Andrushenko. Right? Sorry, it wasn't a quote by the mayor. It was a quote by his assistant, his advisor, who is also not in Mariupol, by the way. Mr. Andrushenko said that officials were finding 50 to 100 bodies beneath every collapsed building, which is tragic if true. However, how does Mr. Andrushenko knows this? Because he is not in Mariupol. He is in Kiev. Which officials? Russian officials? Ukrainian officials? We don't know. The article goes on. Over a period of 12 weeks, as Russian shells fell indiscriminately on apartment complexes, hospitals, and town squares, Mariupol became a symbol of Russian willingness to bring devastation. So far, so good, right? We're just reading about Russians committing war crimes, essentially, shelling the city indiscriminately, right? Just keep that in mind, this indiscriminate shelling bit. Keep in mind also the quote by the top UN officials, because I actually took some pains to find this official, and it is accurate. The article is accurate. It is the top human rights official for the UN. However, there's a very important paragraph in the aforementioned official's speech, which was made on June 17th, that I want to point out to you, that will sort of clarify this idea of indiscriminate shelling. Not in favor of Ukraine. The article goes on to quote a message posted in the Mariupol Now Telegram channel. The body of a 6-year-old Lisa remained in a car for 10 days, a message posted on the Mariupol Now Telegram channel on Tuesday night read. She was shot along with her family when she tried to get out of Mariupol. Her mother lost both legs and was unable to attend her daughter's funeral. A picture of Lisa showed a blue-eyed child with wavy curls. It hits you right in the gut, right in your heart. Sad. No, it's sad. If it's true, it's heartbreaking. However, I also want to point out that the New York Times journalist is using Telegram channels to substantiate her claims and her article. And so, going forward, I'm not going to have any reservations about substantiating my claims by relying on YouTube channels of Russian bloggers sometimes with very small audiences, right, who contradict what the Western media is reporting on the news in Ukraine. So here I want to pause to say that in the same speech that the article is referencing on the 17th of June, this top OHCHR official, right, the UN human rights official, stated that verifiably there are 1,348 individual civilian deaths in the city. That's what they can verify. Also, this official went on to say that the verification process is difficult because they don't have access to the city, and the Ukrainian officials don't have access to the city. But through what they call reliable sources and phone calls, this is the number that that they have. In the same speech, the official did say that the number could be much higher. However, the official did not specify how much higher the number is. They kind of left that open-ended. And the other thing that I want to focus on is, remember this thing about the indiscriminate shelling? Well, here is the thing. So this is what the human rights official says about the deaths, right? The deaths were caused by airstrikes, tank and artillery shelling, and small arms and light weapons during the street fighting. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now, there's farther down below in this speech, there's an interesting paragraph, right? Which says, despite our attempts at verifying, it is not clear to what extent the parties to the conflict complied with the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. What are those principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution? We're going to look at those briefly in a minute. Civilian survivors shared varying accounts, but most reported that military positions were often placed in immediate proximity of civilians and civilian objects. That would be the defenders, which are the Ukrainian forces, placing military equipment near the civilians. Attacks on those positions were common practice. Of course it would be. It's called return fire. The harm to civilians was extensive. Let's get back to the New York Times, Rag. The article really goes on to talk about, for example, things like when Mariupol was, I'm just going to read the rest of the article. When Mariupol was surrounded, no, I don't want to read the rest of this shit. It's utter garbage. It's designed to hit you in the emotions. This is the kind of stuff that this is the kind of stuff that I was talking about in my video about free speech, where it's rhetoric. It's manipulative rhetoric. It pretends to be the truth, and it's 90% true, right? So this is a very high quality propaganda, I would say. 90% true. The 10% of it is the stuff that will subtly shapes your perception, right? The subtle manipulation, or actually not very subtle. This isn't very subtle. They're talking about dead kids, for crying out loud. But what they're not telling you is that the mayor of the city, this character that that the article cites, this guy who claims Russians killed more than 22,000 civilians in Mariupol, right? He claims this while he was in Kiev for the last 3 months. This is the guy who abandoned his people on the 24th of March. The military operation in Ukraine began on the 24th of February, and on that day, according to Shraiy reporting, the mayor came out and made a public statement saying that don't panic, we got this under control. We have shelters ready. We have food and water stored for you. We're going to fight and we're going to repel the invaders. So this is the 24th of February. On the 25th of February, he reaffirmed this statement. However, even at that time, there was a video that surfaced on Telegram channels by a Ukrainian resident of Mariupol, a young woman, who contradicted her mayor and said that shelters weren't open next to the neighborhood where she lived. Anyways, on the 27th of February, the mayor does another news conference and says that we will stand in place and overcome the Russian invaders. Okay? 4th of March, the mayor claims, so on the 4th of March is when the Russians started to announce the so-called green corridors and asking people, civilians, to evacuate. Now, in order to, so these green corridors were in place to allow civilians in the city to be evacuated. At the same time, Russian Ministry of Defense was reporting that the Ukrainians were not allowing people to leave the city. Just keep that in mind. So on the 4th of March, there was a little bit a period of quiet is declared by the mayor, right? And on the 10th of March, however, the mayor still says, hey, we're going to be okay. Help is coming. Help is coming. And he also says, we will win. We are strong. Mariupol, Ukraine is our land. We love it. Right? On the 20th of March, one of his staff members posts a message on the social media that basically is directed at Russians, saying, fuck you, no Mariupol. On the 24th of March, the mayor and his entire team leave the city. And on the 24th of March, he gives an interview in which he says that he had to leave the city because the communication was cut off. And so in order to communicate with Kiev, he had to leave the city. In a later interview, he claims that he came back to the city on the 27th of March to give a press conference or a briefing. And after the 27th of March, he left and did not return. The article goes on to say that the omnipresent corpses are creating a public health crisis. Mr. Boychenko fears. Doctors say thousands of people might die in Mariupol because of infectious disease. He said, that's a quote from the article. The article goes on to quote Mr. Boychenko saying, oh, I'm sorry, not Mr. Boychenko, it's this other guy. Andrushenko says that the Russian forces have halted the process of exhuming the bodies in Mariupol. He asserts that the occupiers made the process of reburial of Mariupol residents as complicated as possible, shifting all the problems to the citizens, he says. Now it is necessary to wait for the investigator with the prosecutor to carry out the exhumation, take the corpse to Donetsk for a medical examination, and only then bury it in a specially designated place. And in each stage, we have to pay. The article actually stops right there. And that's their reporting for you. My impression after reading this article is that, oh my God, the Russians are just the worst. The worst. They killed 22,000 civilians. They bury them in mass graves. And now when you try to move the bodies out of the mass graves, they won't let you until an investigator shows up. The body is moved to Donetsk for a forensic examination before you can rebury it. And then on top of it, you have to pay for it all. That sounds terrible. What terrible people, right? What a orcs. Terrible orcs. Wouldn't you get that impression by reading this article? Of course you would. Anybody would. Fortunately, for Russian speakers like me, I can go on YouTube still, despite all the attempts to shut down Russian channels, and find videos of residents of Mariupol and videos of the city. Bird's eye view of the city taken from drones. That, yeah, the city is badly damaged, but it's being rebuilt. There are no stacked corpses on the streets. The residents of the city are reporting that it was the Ukrainians who looted their apartments, who kicked them out of their places of residence, who threatened them, who kept them in basements, who shelled them when they came out to get water or to cook on open fire. There are hundreds of hours of this video evidence. It's not accessible to the English-speaking audience, the language barrier being the biggest problem. The fact that YouTube's auto-translate is garbage. It's really difficult to translate common speech on the fly, and it doesn't work. So you can't. You have to rely on English-speaking bloggers and just someone like me to tell you what we see with our eyes. And unfortunately, a lot of the English-speaking bloggers, are consumed with bigger stories. Mariupol is getting better. It's being rebuilt. It's not the catastrophe that the city's mayor, former mayor, he's not a mayor of Mariupol, he abandoned his post. If he was a mayor, he should have stayed there. He should have stayed with his people. But he fled. He fled. And he blames others for his own failures. Mariupol will be fine. Russians are not orcs. They're people who want to rebuild the city that was damaged in the fighting, that they had a part in damaging. But they are rebuilding it. And life to Mariupol is slowly returning to normal. That's all I have for today's video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.